Can you hear me? I am,
Can you hear yourself now?
no.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
I am,
Okay.
Can you hear yourself now?
No. Yeah.
See, this is, I don't know what we did before.
Okay. All right, so we're going to start over. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, there you go.
Oh.
All right, so we're going to start over.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience. Oh. All right, so we're going to start over. So you're getting feedback.
Okay.
Now,
All right, it looks good. All right, guys, thanks for your patience with me on this. There's a couple of things that I wanted to go over with you today because I had seen something on Twitter that I thought was really interesting. But the first thing that I wanted to show you was something that came up on a live stream that I watched earlier today, which kind of proves my my point about Newsom. And I thought that I thought it was pretty interesting. All right, so let's go to that first. Hang on one second. I'm just finding another thing I want to show you. Okay. All right, so let's do that first. Where did that go? There it is. All right, I'm going to share the screen. All right, this is very quick. I listen to this guy pretty frequently. Hopefully you can see the screen okay. Having some technical issues here. Let's see. What is going on? All right, listen very carefully.
Looks incredibly clear at this point. So I'd say there's no chance of Biden being in the general election. It seems clear that the only person who could step in would be Newsom. It does feel clear that the effort to put Trump in jail, or at least take him out legally in some way, will go to DEFCON 25. That however much effort they were putting into crippling Trump for the election, now they have to apply the kill shot. They have to take out the king, so to speak, before the king gets in power. Because if Trump gets in power in this context, there's a lot of people who are going to get fired. A lot of people are going to get fired. Right? So I would think there's some panic and desperation happening. And panic and desperation, given the context of all the types of plays they usually do on the left, doesn't it largely guarantee that there's going to be a real big fake story about Trump, like a really big one? Because I don't think they have enough to work with the stuff they have. Would you agree? They've got weak sauce mixed with weak sauce, mixed with weak sauce. There's very few people care about what's in those boxes. Now, I don't think Trump's done the best job of defending himself about the boxes. You do? You care about the boxes? Well, I care to find out if a Republican can look at them and tell us if we should be concerned. Where's the Republican who went into a skiff, looked at whatever's in the boxes, and came out and said, it doesn't look so bad, or it is as bad as they say? Where's that? How long does it take to get at least one Republican with, as the highest level of clearance to look at the boxes and just tell us what's in there? Not in detail, just somebody we trust, Send in a, Thomas Massey, Tom Cotton, somebody that the right would trust, and, Rand Paul, somebody that they know is not going to lie when they walk out of the ship. And isn't it great? I actually love this. I can think of several Republicans that I would trust absolutely to tell me what was in the skiff. Not all of them, and not even the majority of them. But I love the fact that there is a small handful of Republicans that if they tell you they saw it with their own eyes or didn't see it with their own eyes, I would totally believe them. I don't know that there's any Democrat that would fit in that category. Do you? Name a Democrat who you would know wouldn't lie even if you totally disagree with them. I can't think of one. But you can think of quite a few Republicans who you're well, okay, RFK Jr. All right, I'll give you that. I'm going to give you RFK Jr. So you win. You got one. Yeah, there's no evidence that he lies. There is plenty of evidence that he's not been completely accurate in his suppositions about scientific stuff. I think there's evidence of that. I don't know what's true, but there's at least evidence that he may have gotten some wrong and some right. We don't know what the mix is. You know, nobody could be right all the time on that domain. All right. Do you understand now why TikTok has not been banned?
Looks like my audio was not working very well at some point, but this is about a 20-minute walk from my front door. I wanted to show you guys that. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that. Pretty good, huh? Not bad. Cool. Excellent. Okay. Let's get back to the live stream and find out what's going on with this. So I wanted to show you what Scott Adams had to say about how it looks like we might. He just barely mentioned it. He barely mentioned it at all. But how we might get Newsom to throw his hat in the ring. We'll see what happens with that. And another somebody else that I talk about a lot regarding the censorship industrial complex is Mike Benz. So I want to share something that he shared. So hold on. All right, can you guys see that? Looks good.
Good morning. I am here in sunny, beautiful San Diego in the famous Balboa Park. And I wanted to talk today about something called competitive middleware. Now, competitive middleware is a very Orwellian phrase. It doesn't mean whatever you think right now middleware means. You probably think it's like some sort of, computer software, sort of like anti-spyware or like McAfee antivirus or something. Middleware refers to the middle of the road censorship liaisons that are growing right now in size and strength and that are going to be the future of the censorship industry. So let me break down what I mean and just lay out a few things that we're going to cover here in this little walk and talk. So we're going to cover the whole of society and how it's structured, the whole of society censorship industry. We're going to cover NewsGuard. We're going to cover the Missouri v. Biden ruling and its implications. And we're going to cover the plan for how they are going to restructure the censorship industry away from a top-down government-driven model and into a so-called competitive middleware model. And I'll get through all that. So let's start with the whole of society. So as folks who've been following me for a long time know, whole of society means 4 categories of institutions all working together as a seamless web. Government institutions, private sector institutions, civil society institutions, and news media and fact-checking institutions. We'll break down all those really quickly. Government institutions. There are 5 categories of government censorship activities within those government agencies. There's government funding, government pressure, government coordination, government outsourcing, and government laundering. Censorship of all of that. So censorship funding, censorship pressure, censorship coordination, censorship outsourcing, and censorship laundering. Every federal agency does a slightly different combination of all of these things. For example, the National Science Foundation does censorship funding, but it doesn't do censorship pressure. That is, you're never going to find a Twitter files from somebody at the National Science Foundation telling Twitter to take down a post. But you will find the National Science Foundation funding the groups that do that. The FBI, you will see them doing censorship pressure, but you're not going to see them doing censorship funding. Now, there's a little bit of compensation that they gave to tech companies for complying with the request, but that's not really funding in a classical government sense. So there are a whole coterie of federal departments that are involved in the censorship industry representing the government side. So there's DHS, which does government coordination and government outsourcing. There's DOD, which does funding and laundering. There's state, which also does funding and laundering. There's FBI, which does pressure. There's HHS, NIH, and NIAID, which do COVID-related both funding and pressure. And at this point, basically every government agency that has a role will also have a sort of misinformation unit or a democracy unit that is deployed to help censor opposition to that government agency's policies. So a great example of this is what's happening with the FDA. Even the FDA now has a counter-misinformation unit that does this. Around 2019, they implemented this whole of society model, and that's why every government agency is in on the business. So I'm going to walk through a music zone here. So that's the government side. The private sector side is comprised of 2 parts. It's the tech platforms themselves where the censorship happens, but it's also the CSR wings of the private sector companies, that is corporate social responsibility. So when they say whole of society private sector, they mean Google, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Twitch, but they also mean the corporate social responsibility arms, the funding arms of Microsoft and Apple and Facebook's endowment. So that's the private sector. So again, it's where the censorship happens, but it's also where funding comes from. Civil society is comprised of the universities, the NGOs, the nonprofits, the foundations, and then activist researchers. They talk about a spectrum between activism and research, but where they say it's basically the same thing, but you can be more of a shill or you can be more of a straight researcher. But of course, in this case, all of the research is basically weapons research for weapons-grade censorship. And then there's the news media and fact-checking arms, which are the priest-class media institutions that are handpicked in order to create a pressure valve to pressure the private sector to censor what the government wants. This has been the model from 2018, essentially, up until late 2022, when a series of changes forced a anticipated restructuring of the censorship industry. Those changes were: the House turned over from Democrat to Republican, and the House controls the purse string and has investigations power, which has created a lot of pressure from 8 different congressional committees all invested in this. Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, which broke the Silicon Curtain, which had descended over all the terms of service policies of all the social media companies. And then also a bunch of legal victories and awareness campaigns around the disinformation governance boards toppling and the Missouri Biden case, among others. So where are we now is the Missouri v. Biden case has this very powerful injunction, which is currently on stay until oral arguments are heard. But it threatens to ban all government coordination of domestic censorship, with a few exceptions that are probably not going to be tried at first, because there's criminal contempt penalties for not going along for violating it. And the Stanford Cyber Working Group anticipated a loss in the Missouri v. Biden case and propped up a new plan called competitive middleware. Now, competitive middleware is the idea that if you balloon up the civil society bridge between the government and the private sector, if you balloon up the civil society, then you can actually approximate a sort of top-down government type quarterback role by parking it outside of government. And middleware means these sort of intermediating censorship mercenary firms like NewsGuard. So NewsGuard is said to be a middleware solution to countering misinformation. It's a censorship tool because what it does is it affixes these news ratings that allow the basically mass banning and throttling and deplatforming and demonetizing of all alternative news that the government doesn't want. So if they staff up these middleware institutions with a kind of shadow government force and they give it government grade funding, then it can effectively circumvent the First Amendment prohibitions on running a comparable thing out of DHS. And NewsGuard is a great example of this because on their board of advisors, they have a former four-star general, head of the CIA, head of the NSA, head of the Global Engagement Center from the State Department, head of DHS, and head of NATO. So it is an all-star apex predator cast of the national security state, all on the board of a middleware, not technically government. It is the greats of government boot heel in the national security state, but it's all parked outside of government. Their plan right now is to build up middleware. And they have a technique for doing this they call capacity building, which means pumping it up full of money, pumping it up with personnel. And one thing to really be out on the lookout for here is something around disinformation compliance. Now, this is going to be big because on August 25th, sorry, it's a little hot out here. On August 25th, just weeks away, the EU is going to kick into motion these new rules requiring compliance with EU disinformation rules for Twitter to continue to do business in the EU market. NewsGuard is already billing itself as a disinformation compliance service to comply with these new EU disinformation laws. So you have the situation right now where what they're trying to do is, rather than have DHS force Twitter through coercive pressure and twisting their arm, they're going to have entities like NewsGuard step in, and in order to comply with the EU disinformation regulations, you're going to need to buy NewsGuard's disinformation compliance services. Very similar to how this whole compliance with DEI industry popped up when you needed DEI programs for your ESG scores or to qualify for government contracts. It's very nasty stuff, and it's coming soon.
Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me all right. And hopefully you got all that from Mr. Mike Benz. He's probably one of the more valuable voices that has come up recently. I'm learning a lot from him, and I'm also finding that much of what he says I kind of already know, but I sort of knew anecdotally. So there's a couple of things he mentioned. He mentioned the Missouri v. Biden case. This is the case where on July 4th, the lower court judge in Louisiana issued an injunction against the Biden administration from communicating with or pressuring social media to censor uh, voices that they felt were dangerous or hurtful or um, anything that they felt was either misinformation or disinformation or even malinformation. And you guys can look up what those terms mean. But so this lower court judge in Louisiana put an injunction on the Biden administration, basically saying, no, 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 you can't do that. This is a violation of the First Amendment right. Unfortunately, later on this month, it's hard to believe that all of this has happened within the last couple of weeks. Things go so quickly in this world we live in now. So I don't know if you guys can see this. This is from the Associated Press. The appeals court pauses the order limiting the Biden administration's contact with social media companies. So what this means is that the injunction on Biden was sort of softly lifted. So and as Mike Benz just explained, there has to be further uh, disclosures and further court proceedings around this. And so the higher court in the state of Louisiana, which is the Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, which is the federal court, the higher court actually put a pause on that injunction. So it's not quite a win. It's kind of a win, but it's not quite a win. And so I wanted to just clarify that for you guys. Of course, you can read about how the appeals court put the pause on the injunction. You can read all about that on your own as well. One thing that he talked about in his walk and talk that he did earlier today in San Diego, and I'm going to get rid of this screen, so it's just me now. One thing he talked about was this whole of society approach, which is a term that many mainstream outlets were using over the last few years, starting with the elections when they were concerned about, election integrity. And so they created something called the EIP, or the Election Integrity Project. So a lot of the people that were sort of representing this, concern over misinformation, especially around elections, were using a term called whole of society approach. They would say things like, we really need a whole of society approach to these issues and to how dangerous this is to the American people. So whole of society approach is basically, and I'm sure Mike Benz would agree with me, but in lay terms, what it means is that you are no longer going to have your government policing you, but you are going to be policing you. And unelected agencies and services, like wraparound services, will be installed so that you can meet the criteria to have integrity in the information that is shared on your platforms, right? So for instance, during the COVID operation, there were third parties, there were liaisons, there were contractors that were put in place. Like, say you wanted to go to a music venue and you wanted to see a band, and say the music venue was told by the people in their county, like their managers, their county managers, their health secretaries of their local counties, look, you cannot allow people to come in to your venue without proof of a vaccination So we've set up an entire system of third-party contractors, applications that your visitors, the people that visit your venue, your concert goers, applications and apps that they can download on their phone. So there's a whole series of things that you would have to go through in order to have your experience. Well, it's the same thing. In order to have your experience online, each um, social media presence would have to have, these, like he talked about NewsGuard, which is not only is it, something that is there to offer information about how to stay safe or whatever from misinformation, but NewsGuard then suddenly also becomes like a liaison, like, oh, here, download this um, this application or this app into your system, which will verify you. So you will be verified. You will be a verified, safe platform, right? So all of these things are created as ways to keep people employed, keep, especially people in the tech industry, keep them from, to keep them employed and to keep them heavily funded by the government. So, these tech people are creating these apps. They're coming up with these ideas on how to keep information safe, keep the people who share the information safe from the bad actors, that kind of thing. So it becomes less and less of a government or military intervention and more of that whole of society approach, where you've got, this certifiable agency over here that's, certified by the government, that they can be the the shield. It shields you from dangerous information, that kind of thing. Just like there was a whole system that, concert goers or people who were attending events at certain venues were shielded from possibly being exposed to a pathogen because they downloaded an app and they made sure they went through all the proper channels to keep themselves safe. It's that kind of thing where things are just thrown in place in between you and your online experience, or you and your, actual in-person venue experience. Things are thrown in there in between that, and it's just a money-making scam. It's some of it is about control. Sure, I guess it's about control. I guess it's about surveillance. But really, what it is it's creating something out of nothing, something that you don't really need. It's they see an opening and they take advantage of it. Have you ever heard that term, like in marketing? Ooh, there's an opening. I better take advantage of, what that means. There's nothing there to fill the space. So I'm going to go in and put something in there and create an alleged need, right? So but when it comes to something like this, where it's just kind of like a money-making scam, but then that thing also is tied to censorship and it becomes an entire industry around it, that's when things get a little dicey. That's when things get a little scary. And that's when people start to say, okay, enough. We need to make sure that, that our civil liberties and our personal freedoms are not affected by these liaisons, if you will. You know what I'm saying? So there's a couple of people you're hearing a lot about them in the media. And so I want to share this Fox article. It's the smoking gun documents. Let's see. All right. So the smoking gun documents prove that Facebook censored Americans on behalf of the White House, Jim Jordan says. So, documents were finally made public, and Jim Jordan, who is a Republican out of Ohio. He's a representative in Ohio. He's really putting himself in front of the media a lot as saying, look what we discovered. We discovered that this is our smoking gun. We discovered that, Facebook was pressured by the White House to censor really important information that, ultimately could have saved people's lives. And it was beyond unconstitutional. It was actually pretty malevolent what the White House did, what the Biden administration did, where they really twisted the arm of the Facebook, C-suite, like like say the CEO of informational algorithms or something like that. It's like they really pressured them to censor important information, and they targeted people in general. So if you go through this article, there's like, all these tweets. Facebook Files Part 1, the smoking gun docs prove that Facebook censored Americans because of the Biden White House pressuring people. So what I think what is happening is social media is responding. So there are a lot of users out there that are saying social media bad, and social media is bad, but for different reasons. I consider it bad for different reasons, not for the reasons here. But let's just focus on this. So social media bad because social media censors, and so this is what users are saying, and social media is responding to that by saying, "Hey, look, we were just, we're following the government's pressure. We were being threatened by the government. We were being, the government was demanding us to do these things. We were literally given no choice. Staff members walked out because they felt that it was so wrong that, that this was being done. They left Facebook and possibly went over to Twitter. So, and I'll tell you about what's going on with Twitter, or X, as well in just a minute. But so what we have is, through this story, if you take that 150,000 foot view of the story, we have the story of the big tech giant saying, whoa, 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 users, it's not our fault that you're so censored. It's the government's fault. The government is doing this to you. Don't you remember? We're libertarians. So I feel like that's kind of what's going on with this story as well. And Jim Jordan is sort of the newest darling of the hour. He's the guy that broke the story. AOC says Facebook should be broken up subject to antitrust activity. All sorts of stuff, like, Biden publicly saying that social media platforms were actually killing people. I mean, that's some pretty strong language coming from the president of the United States for something that you're toilet tweeting at 9 p.m. You know what I mean? That's a bit extreme, don't you think? So, so this story, if you really take that 150,000 foot view and look down on it and don't get so caught up in the details, is really basically social media responding to you and your complaints about censorship. So I find it's an interesting conversation, and we'll see what happens in the long run. Obviously, this is a Fox story. So I'm sure you can find it. You can just type in smoking gun documents, Jim Jordan, and it'll be the first story that pops up. So I wanted to bring that up to you, bring that up as well. Let's see, is there anything going on? Great. All right, you guys seem to be hearing me okay. I was having some technical difficulties earlier, so I appreciate your patience with me. Yes, we are still in the middle of the move, and we will be for a couple of months. But I wanted to take a couple of minutes to bring this to your attention. So I think that what is happening with these disclosures, especially with now proof positive that we have, the Biden administration forcing important information to be censored, information that literally could have saved lives, and would change the way um, people live their life and what decisions they make. This goes back to something that I said a long, long, long time ago, years ago, which is that you've got a dangerous precedent here where the ability to have a independent thought, have an independent choice and independent thought has been eroded out of your consciousness through this kind of government partnership with this whole of society approach. It's really difficult to have an independent thought when your grandma is handing you some cookies right out of the oven and repeating the talking points of her favorite program or her favorite news station, and or her news piece, and she's not just saying, okay, well, my favorite person said this, and so I'm repeating it to you. But what she's doing is she's making it her own. And so she's telling you, her young, vulnerable grandchild, information that isn't true, and she's interpreting it in her own language and making it her own. And so what's happened is the suspension of independent thought that becomes such a strong moral issue. Like it goes beyond censorship. It goes way beyond censorship. It's one of the reasons why I chose the lobotomy scene in my video essay, Sadism, the New Model Sadism. It's one of the reasons I chose the lobotomy scene, because I wanted to really drive home the point that there are people that are reaching into your brains and unleashing, eroding programs into you where you're incapable of having independent thought, independent choice, independent feelings about things. And this becomes something that goes way beyond just censorship. It goes way beyond just even forcing people to do a thing that they would never do. It's changing the brain. It's manipulating the brain. It's taking the chisel and going right into your frontal lobe and chiseling something out. And that's a crime against humanity. And it's happening at record speed. And so this is why Mike Benz, whenever he does his walks and talks, this is why he always has this sort of hyper sense of urgency about him, because he knows it. He knows that it's basically this whole of society approach is literally lobotomizing people. And he sees it and he knows it, and he's putting all the pieces in place for you, and he's telling you who the culprits are, the people who are doing it. And so I'm sort of interpreting what he's saying, and taking it into a more philosophical or even existential conversation that says, this is a lobotomy that's happening, and this goes beyond censorship. And that's why I used that scene that I found. That's why I used it for that piece, the New Model Sadism, because I knew that it would make an impact. And a lot of people talk about it. I get a lot of emails. I can't believe you used that part for your video essay about lobotomies. That was really hard to watch. Well, that's what's happening. That's what's happening in society right now. where people are taking programmed information that is harmful to them and they're making it their own. They're interpreting it as value added, language, and they think that they're elevating their language when really what they're doing is hurting themselves. And it's so pervasive. It's everywhere. You can't get away from it anywhere. So when these platforms are creating these relationships and contracts with these outside government agencies, where have we heard that before? Okay, these social media platforms are creating contracts with government or with outside government agencies. So these are people that are really never held accountable. How do you go after the government? How do you go after the social media? It becomes very, very muddy, and it becomes very challenging and scattered and chaotic. It's what we saw when the Department of Defense contracted with outside contractors to deploy various other contractors to deploy various other contractors to deploy. You see what I'm saying? What ultimately amounted to an experimental modified gene therapy program. But because there were so many hands and so many pots and so many different contractors, you could never follow the line of connection. You could never make that connection either back to, the ultimate manufacturer, which would have been Pfizer, or the government, or the Department of Defense, which was the instigator, right? Everybody seemed to be, like, oh, hey, it's not my problem, it's not my fault. And so part of me thinks that that's why Facebook suddenly became Meta, because whenever a company goes through a rebranding, in my opinion, now I could be wrong, but whenever a company goes through a rebranding and they kind of change their name and change their whole, brand and all that, I believe that it has something to do with, you know, creating a shield, like a liability shield. Like, is that why Twitter is now X? Is that why Facebook is now Meta? Is they're creating a liability shield the way, so many of these big pharmaceutical companies also created liability shields by partnering and contracting and rebranding and and all that stuff. Like, think about it, right? I don't know if it's so much about, more surveillance and more control. And I know with X, the marketing around Elon Musk changing Twitter to X is, oh, hey, it's a new way of uh, of transaction. It's like transactional relationships. You give, I pay, you give, that kind of thing, whatever. It's like paying someone for being creative, or paying someone who maybe lost the ability to have a relationship with a corporate bank, and so it gives them another option. Is that all just cover for liability protection? Because there are people who are suing Twitter right now, because prior to Elon Musk, Twitter was also under a lot of pressure from the government to censor and remove people off of their platform. The first incident, that we saw of this, which I felt was one of the more, I felt that it was the signal that pivoted us into this new paradigm. It's a very dangerous paradigm, by the way. But the signal for me was when Twitter Safety, and they are a Twitter page. They are called Twitter Safety, at Twitter Safety, decided to circumvent all rules and all law and everything, and just suddenly became the most powerful entity in the world when they took down the president of the United States. And so I said, this feels like a coup. That's what it felt like. When Twitter safety said, we are going to remove the then president of the United States, which is Donald Trump, we're going to remove him. We're just going to delete him. We're just going to kill him. We're going to kill him. We killed him. He's dead off our platform. That felt like a coup to me. And I even said it. I even tweeted about it back then. I said, this feels like a coup. Who has the right to take down the most powerful and influential individual in the free world? Apparently, Twitter safety did. So, and that's when it first happened. When Donald Trump was removed off the platform, that's when it all started. And then all of a sudden, all these people fell and were killed as well. They were all felled. A whole bunch of people, doctors, scientists, people that were questioning, reputable people that were questioning the outcome of elections, things like that. So that was the signal. So we have something, that we really need to pay attention to. I think that we have to start thinking of every single individual who is part of the medical industrial complex as well as the social media industrial complex. We have to think of them as government cutouts. We have to. We can't think of them as just individuals who, went to medical school and they got their degree and they're great. No, they're all part of the government. They, at some point in their life and in their career, they were involved with programs, experimental programs, mind control programs, national security agencies, national security programs. They're not just people like me and you. They're government cutouts. And I think that goes for the tech industry and that goes for the medical industry as well, in my opinion. If we start thinking of these platforms like that, then we can start to think of different ways to communicate with each other. Obviously, the best way to communicate is in person. But information is really, really valuable right now. It's one of the most, it's the most important thing that you could have in your life is correct information, good information, information that makes you think, information that helps you to come to your own conclusions about things. And right now, social media is the only platform where that can happen. And it's just a network of people that are trying to keep it real. And I feel like I'm part of that network, but it's very challenging because of the censorship, right? So go back and follow Mike Benz if you can. Take a look at some of those articles I shared. And thank you for joining today and for bearing with me during the first couple of minutes while I went through some technical difficulties, but we got through it. And hopefully you got something out of today's audio broadcast. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.